to play for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
Hey, it's an SEC final in the College World Series. LSU and my pick, Florida, get it going Saturday, late afternoon. I think that's a 4 p.m. Eastern start. What a run of games it's been. I think that classic between LSU and Wake Thursday, people are going to remember that one for a long time. It ended the number one team season in 11 innings, a ridiculous pitching duel between two first-round arms. Braden Taylor's drive in the TCU-Florida game, Florida advanced despite the fact that all the data tells us, this was a great thing I saw on Twitter, that Taylor's long out to center field would have been a hit in every big league stadium. Just wow. Happy weekend, everybody. This is the FSS Plus podcast alongside Joe Doyle. I'm Jason Churchill. Joe, when Taylor hit that ball, the first thing I thought was, oh my goodness, he did it. This is what a great, like it was a great ending anyway, but wow. Did you think it was gone when he hit it?
I thought it was eighth row. I mean, I thought it was way, way gone. So, yeah, man, that the college baseball, the last, 72 hours has been sick. I mean, I can't think of a better representation for college baseball. I've told you this on previous episodes. I feel like college baseball is taking some pretty sizable steps to the casual baseball fan over the last couple of years. And man, this college baseball season has really done wonders for the sport.
Absolutely. Let's just say this way. If you listen to this show or any podcast and you just happen to be catching this one on, maybe you clicked on this on accident. If you just like baseball and you like environments, and that's one of the things, Joe, that draws me to college football is the environments. Like I was at a game in Columbus, to see Ohio State and Wisconsin. What an amazing environment. I saw Penn State on a whiteout day. What an amazing day. Like Ames, Iowa, amazing environments. College baseball brings it when it comes to the environments. And when you get to the regionals, the super regionals, the College World Series itself, everything just takes a step up. You're right. That was what a display of incredible competition between athletes and teams. And the crowd always brings it in Omaha. So man, that was pretty incredible.
You know what I've enjoyed this playoffs, man? Like I think you get a lot of college baseball playoffs where there's a lot of really interesting teams, the Coastal Carolinas, the Oral Roberts, the Wingates, the Belmont, there's always a lot of interesting teams that are always mixed in. And it feels like most years you have a good smattering of pro prospects. Every single team in this tournament, the last final 16 teams, maybe with the exception of Oral Roberts, but Cade Denton is a dude.
Denton is a dude. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, every single team seems to have at least one top 50 player. And I think the coolest part has been like, if you're a pro baseball fan and you're really into the draft, and that's kind of what's bringing you into college baseball, these stars have starred out like through and through. It's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, so now you're in the final. It's LSU, Florida, all SEC final, but just like what you were just saying, you get Dylan Cruz, you get Paul Skeens, you get Tommy White, you get all these prospects for LSU that we've been talking about for months, but also Florida not only has prospects for this year, but some big time elite guys for next year. But might we get a Paul Skeens, Thurston Waldrop matchup? Is that, I didn't look at the schedule and when the last time those guys threw, but if we get that matchup, that's a matchup you're not going to want to miss. If you like baseball at any level, that's a matchup you are absolutely not going to want to miss. Absolutely incredible. That's a really good, it's a really good point, Joe. Yeah, draft prospects galore. It's incredible.
I don't know if it can it top Paul Skeens versus Rhett Lauder? Like, that was one of the best pitching matchups.
Like the
I've
matchup is very similar, but can the performance, can the actual game and how entertaining that was, can it get better than that? Probably not.
I don't think so, man. It's been really cool. Yeah.
All right, we're going to chat draft and only draft in this episode. We are 16 days out in the 2023 Major League Baseball draft. Now, the draft is a 3-day kind of endeavor, so to speak. I don't even want to call it an event. It is like day 1 is an event. Day 2 and day 3, those are endeavors. You have to have some serious endurance to sit through those and to do that. And Joe, you and I have done this for years. Fun, interesting. One of the things I've been thinking about of late, Joe, is if I am team blank, what am I hoping happens in front of me? And I'm hoping we can play that game with a few clubs in this episode here. One team in the top 5 in particular. Also, I want to ask about the floor of a particular college bat. And there is a really, to me, a polarizing talent in the top 10 or 20 that I want to talk about. We're going to get to that in this episode. And it's not because just by himself, it's the profile that's polarizing. So that's what we're going to do. Draft, and more draft in this episode of the FSS Plus podcast. Let's start out with the team thing, Joe. Like let's start with number 5. If I am the Minnesota Twins at number 5, obviously I'd love if Dylan Cruz or Paul Skeens fell to me. Probably really not all that realistic. That's probably best case scenario. But if you're sitting in the Twins front office and you're putting together draft boards and you're thinking about scenarios and you eliminate the highly unlikely, what is it that you're hoping happens for you in the top 4 as you sit there at number 5 waiting for that pick to come?
I mean, I think if I am the general manager of the Twins, I'm obviously hoping that one of Max Clark, Walker Jenkins, one of those is there. I'm assuming they're going to be there. If I'm the Twins, any one of those first 5 players is going to be a great option. Now, that being said, I've said before that I do think this is a deeper draft in terms of high school bats. And so I don't think you can eliminate the idea of, well, I know the Twins have the 4th most amount of dollars to spend. What if they went a little under slot here? What if they were like, what if we just want to spend a little bit more in the 2nd round and a little bit more in the 3rd round and really take advantage of the upper tier of this high school class? What if the Twins were to look at this and say, why don't we do Nolan Schanuel or Chase Davis really cheap?
Let me play you one right kind of in the middle of that. Let me play one right in the middle of that, Joe. How about Matt Shaw? So he's probably not quite Nolan Schanuel when it comes to saving. But at 5, you probably could save a little bit on Matt Shaw. Like maybe not really a great. You might probably not saving $2 million, but you could probably shave $1 million off that slot and get a guy like that who the Twins do like college bats. They are going to have some, if you look at organizational needs, not that that's a major part of why you'd go Shaw here, but he does fill an organizational need. You have Brooks Lee. Matt Shaw probably moves to second base or third base. Brooks Lee probably moves to second base or third base. But I think early on, Brooks Lee is going to be able to play shortstop. But right now they have Carlos Correa anyway. So if you just fill that infield or that roster, that organization, your farm system with college bats that are close, like proximity has value here. Especially the Twins are a competitive team leading the American League Central, the terrible American League Central. What about Matt Shaw? Does that fit?
It's kind of funny that we bring up this conversation today, the day that Nick Gonzalez is promoted. I kind of look at Matt Shaw as how much different is he than, first of all, how much different is what Nick Gonzalez has turned into different than what Matt Shaw is? I think Matt Shaw is going to be a better hitter. I don't think there's any doubts. And the numbers kind of bear that out in terms of like who they were in college as college players. But Nick Gonzalez really kind of turned into a power second base, left field type of a profile. And I think that's what Matt Shaw could be. And I tell you what, if you can get Matt Shaw at 5 and save, I don't know, you can throw out the number 1.2 million and really set yourself up for some high profile high school talent in the 2nd and 3rd round. I think that's an absolutely fantastic way to go about this draft.
Yeah. Nick Gonzalez, by the way, the Pirates pick in 2020, never really did, other than down in high A ball a couple of years ago when he was 22 years old, never really did show the big power. He's slugging 450 in 57 games in AAA as a 24-year-old. I'm not really sure he's what I'd call a power hitter, but you're right. From a second base perspective, you're going to get a guy who slugs 430, 440. I mean, that's going to play. That's some pretty decent impact. Matt Shaw seems to have a little bit better, like raw power. No, Like when I watch
Agreed.
that
Oh,
swing, I
without
see
question.
easier
Yeah.
leverage. I see more raw power than Nick Gonzalez. Yeah.
I think
That
he's
was
a
the
little
worry
bit
with Gonzalez.
better.
You remember, played in New
Oh, yeah.
Mexico and the ball travels. That's not the case with Matt Shaw.
I remember he hit a home run at New Mexico, and I could have my numbers wrong, but I want to say it was 43 degrees. Like, not the temperature, like the launch angle was 43 degrees, and it went out.
That is
And so
a
everyone
that
did kind of
is
question, can this kid hit when he's not at elevation? I think Matt Shaw is going to hit for more contact than Nick Gonzalez. I think Matt Shaw
mhm,
is going to hit for more power than Nick Gonzalez. And I just think overall he's a good he's a good player. He's a good bat. And either
mhm,
the bat plays at second base, it plays in left field, it plays at either one of those positions. So many scouts will tell you at the start, just draft hitters. Like, don't worry about it unless they are a designated hitter to start with. Just draft hitters and you'll figure out the rest
mhm.
later.
Yeah, he usually takes care of it for you. So if I'm the Twins, yeah, I guess I'm hoping for a shot at one of those top 4 players: Langford, Clark, Skeens, Cruz, and maybe throw in a fifth one in Jenkins. One of those guys is going to be there. But you could go the underslot play and do something a little bit later as well.
Or Braden
Uh,
Taylor. He's a left-handed hitting third baseman
there
with
you go.
power. I mean, he showed well in the playoffs. I mean, that's kind
Mhm.
of been the profile that they have targeted for the majority of the last 6 or 7 years.
Right. It is with the Twins. Some of these clubs are obviously a little bit more, I don't want to say predictable, but more predictable than others. Like we can see trends. Some clubs have recent
Yeah.
changes in the front office where we really don't know what they're going to do. Some clubs are a little bit all over the map. The Twins are somewhat predictable. I think we have an
Yeah.
idea what they'd like to do in a position like this. Can be really interesting to see what happens. All right, so moving down the draft a little bit from the Twins at number 5. When you take a look at somewhere in the middle of the first round, one of the teams that's really interesting here to me, Joe, is the Chicago White Sox. And they pick at number 15. Now I've seen some mocks. I think your latest mock had them taking Jacob Wilson. I've heard them linked to a ton of guys. How much does in your mind does if you're Ken Williams and Rick Hahn here, like what in the world are we doing with our major league roster at the deadline this year? How much does that come into play when you're thinking about the draft? Because you're going to have an opportunity to take some college guys, Wilson, Jacob Gonzalez, maybe Matt Shaw gets there, guys like that. But if you're going to tear down that roster, perhaps, and sell some pieces and do a quick, kind of a retool and maybe have a step back year or two, are you really worried that, in that situation, might you value proximity ETA a little bit less?
Yeah, the White Sox are going to be one of the toughest teams to kind of figure out. I don't know if the trade deadline is necessarily the linchpin as much as it is just Rick Hahn and Williams looking in the mirror and saying, is this team going to compete in 2024? Like, are we going
Mhm.
to tear this thing down? Are we going to have jobs in 2024? If we're worried about having our jobs, should Rhett Lauder be the pick here if he's here at
Mhm.
15? Should Hurston Waldrop be the pick here if he's here? Do we need someone that's going to contribute in 2024? Do we need reinforcements right away, or are we gonna lose our jobs?
Mhm.
Could Enrique Bradfield fit here? Because he's going to be and we'll talk about that a little bit, but he's going to be a reasonably quick mover, I would think.
Mhm.
I think if you're Rick Hahn, you need to make the decision of selecting the player that's going to be best for the organization long term. And maybe that's a college player, maybe that's a high school player. And I know I'm not specifically answering your question, but I think that organization could go in any number of directions over the next 18 months. And so I think what Rick Hahn has to do is just he has to do his due diligence and make a smart, sound decision, regardless of whether or not he's going to be making that same draft pick in 2024.
So if you're the White Sox, it's granted it's 14 picks. You're never going to be able to predict that. We're not going to be able to predict that. The White Sox aren't going to be able to predict that either. Not 1 through 14 every single pick before their time comes, before they're on the clock. But if you're kind of just generally speaking, if you get to dictate what happens in front of you, if you're the White Sox, are you thinking like, boy, I hope some of these teams ahead of us go the prep route because we want to go the college route, or, in building off of what you said, whatever's best for the organization long term, and you don't really know which direction you're going to go to the rest of this season or next season, and whether you think you can win this season or next season. like that probably does have to come into play. But are you sitting there kind of thinking, hey, I'd really like to get some high upside, talent in this organization. I know they did that a little bit with a couple of recent picks. Or if you're sitting there thinking, man, we need some help. Like we need a shortstop in our system. Because Tim Anderson's deal is up soon. We don't have a lot of athletic outfielders in the system, or we need more arms to replenish. Are you just kind of sitting there thinking, man, I hope one or two of these college arms, get to us, or one of these two, college bats that play the middle infield like Tommy Troy, Matt Shaw, get to us? Is there anything like that, any narrative like that you can kind of tie to if you're sitting there as the White Sox at 15?
I mean, if I was the White Sox, I would be looking at athletes. You and I have talked
Mhm.
about this for a couple of years now. The biggest issue with that lineup is just there's I'll just say what I texted you. There's a lot of pudding cups, like
Mhm.
there's a lot of guys that you just put out at a position and they can't play any other position. And the position you're playing them at, they're not particularly good there either. So they need to make
Uh,
some trades. They need to completely rebuild,
mhm.
retool this roster. There's enough talent in the White Sox organization, even at the big league level, to
Mhm.
replace some of these slugging archetypes for more of the athlete archetypes. And I think you can find those guys that are close to the big league. I've said this since what, January or February. I personally think Enrique Bradfield is the perfect fit for this lineup. You
Mhm.
you get speed, you get on base ability, you get some sort of dynamic ability on the base pass. You take some pressure off of Luis Robert, who has had some lack of focus and boneheaded mistakes in center field, albeit an extremely talented player in center field. His body gets beat up from having to cover all of that room that Eloy Jimenez can't cover and Gavin Sheets can't cover. I think he is the perfect fit for what this team is lacking. And I think he also checks the box of, maybe he's a guy that can contribute to the Chicago White Sox in 2025 when that window should still be open if they're willing to, supplement some pitching into this organization with the presumed losses of Lance Lynn and Lucas Giolito and some of these guys that are coming to the end of their contracts.
I think maybe it goes back to that, Joe, if you're the White Sox. Do we think we can put together a legitimately competitive starting rotation with Lance Lynn coming to the end of his contract and Giolito being a free agent as well? Do we think we can either keep one or both of those guys and add to that and get to the point where we have one of the better rotations, one of the better 2 or 3 rotations, at least in our division? Because that Cleveland situation isn't exactly static either. There's rumors they might shop Shane Bieber. They
Hmm.
obviously have offensive woes there. Minnesota's put together some good stuff there, but if you're looking forward to next season, I mean, Sonny Gray's a free agent. Tyler Malley's going to be out. Kenta Maeda's a free. Like, there's an opportunity there if you're Chicago. So it might just come down to what you just said about the rotation at the big league level. Can we put together a competitive rotation? If the answer is yes, maybe that does change a little bit about how they go about
Let's ask
building
this
this
question
this draft
also.
in 2023.
Can we spend? They need to have an idea. So I'm dead ass serious. On July
Do
9th,
we
they need
know
to know.
the answer to that question in the big picture? I think we do.
Yes,
In the big
but
picture,
in
we
the
do.
short
But
term,
they're not really going to spend. But there's a lot
right.
coming off the
Do we
books.
think do we think a pitcher is going to, do we think they're going to shell out another $70 million deal this winter? Maybe they pray that Rhett Lauder, maybe they pray that teams look at the ceiling of Rhett Lauder and they say,
Mhm,
maybe this is just a tick better than Mike Leake. Maybe this is only a number 3 and look at what Colin Houck could be. Look at what Blake Mitchell could be.
mhm,
Maybe they say, God, I kind of hope that Rhett Lauder falls to 15 and a plug and play type guy that can contribute next year because we're just simply not sure if we're going to have the wallet to go out and make some of these additions that we'd like to make this offseason with some of these better pitchers coming off the book. The White Sox are, man, you and I talked about this with Seattle in 2018 when we used to talk about this. That it is such a bad place, that no man's land where
it
Seattle
is.
had
Mhm.
Nelson Cruz and Robinson Cano and a beat up James Paxton and Felix Hernandez
Felix
was getting
Hernandez
older
at the
and
end of his career. Mhm.
declining. And they had absolutely nothing on the farm. And so I think that's just kind of where Chicago is. It's like, we don't have a lot coming, and we don't have a lot of pitching that can supplement this team in the near term. So I think we just got to take the best player available that can get here quickly.
Their 2023 payroll is about $190 million, give or take. They have $108 million committed for next season. So Grandal His deal comes off the books. We mentioned Giolito. Lance Lynn situation. It has a 2024 option and a $1 million buyout. So there's a bunch of money coming off the books or potentially coming off the books. Andrews is a free agent at the end of the season. I'm missing somebody. Oh,
Has Tim
Ronaldo
Anderson
Lopez.
got one more year?
Tim Anderson has an option. So he had 23 option and 24 option for $12.5 million. So they're going to pick that up. They might trade him,
Team option.
but they're going to
Okay.
pick that up. So really interesting situation there in Chicago, where the draft is just one of the things that comes up in that conversation. One more team in the draft where I'm kind of sitting around, and this is a team that the two of us have covered for years. The Seattle Mariners have picks 22, 29, and 30. If you're just looking at the bucket of picks 1 to 21, is there a narrative or two that stands out to you where you're just thinking, if you're Seattle at 22, you're thinking, if we can get this to happen in front of us, we're going to be set. This is what we want to happen.
I still think, and I know that you don't value him quite as much as I do, but I still think if Tommy Troy is on the board at 22, that checks every box that the Mariners would probably target in this class, and also the shortcomings of the organization as a whole right now. They don't have a second baseman. They don't have a second baseman that's reasonably close to the big leagues. I mean, Cole Young is probably the next in line, and that's September 2025, I would say.
Right.
And I think Tommy Troy could beat him there. For a team that is starved for offense, I just think Tommy Troy or Matt Shaw, I think they're very similar players. I just think they check just about every box that the organization currently lacks.
If either of those guys gets to 22, I'm absolutely on board. I'm just not quite as high on Tommy Troy as some seem to be. There's some out there that are like, this guy's a top 7 guy, and I'm just not there with Tommy Troy. I understand if you're just trying to pick a player, and I just don't do it that way. I don't look at prospect rankings that way. I don't look at the draft that way. I'm not just trying to pick the best player that I'm almost sure is getting to the big leagues. I'm not doing that. I'm thinking I'd rather take a 25% risk at a 60 grade player than have a 75% chance at a 50 grade player. That's kind of the way I think of it when I think about the draft. So I know not everybody does, but just generally speaking, that's the way I look at it. I like Tommy Troy.
I guess we vary just a little bit because I see a lot of Brian Dozier in Tommy Troy, and I think maybe Brian Dozier was a tick better glove, and his glove was not good. But Tommy Troy's faster. He'll probably slow down because he's a really big kid. But yeah, I mean, Brian Dozier was a roll 55 guy, probably a roll 6 guy at his peak.
Yeah. Yep. And that's probably Tommy. That's a really good one for Tommy Troy. I still have questions of whether he can play second base every day long term too. We just didn't get to see him do that. I know he played shortstop in high school and a little bit at Stanford, but he played third base all year. We didn't really get to see him do those things around the bag. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm saying there are some questions, at least for me, and that plays into it as well. But if he's there at 22, all day. Yeah, here's the question. If you're Seattle and somehow, some way, some weird stuff happens, and Tommy Troy and Matt Shaw are there at 22, and they're both slot signings, who do you favor? Are you a Troy guy or are you a Shaw guy?
Yeah, that's eye of the beholder. I think they're so similar. Tommy Troy's a little bit faster. Matt Shaw might have a half tick in the glove department. Neither one of them can really throw. Maybe Tommy Troy's got an average arm. If you're being kind, I think it's probably a bit fringier, but I think it might ultimately come down to the swing. Tommy Troy is more of a grooved, prototype picturesque swing, whereas Matt Shaw's got the enormous leg kick and he loads into the back hip, kind of like what Eric Brown Jr. did last year. So maybe it just comes down to teams, siphoning it all the way down to the biomechanics side of their PD and giving them the pick.
So you just hope, if you're Seattle, you kind of hoping for one of those college infielders, even if it's Braden Taylor at 22, it's like Shaw, Tommy Troy, Braden Taylor. Is there another one that you're hoping gets to you at 22? Not somebody that's a backup plan, but somebody that you're not really sure gets to you at 22, but you think there's at least an outside shot. So you're kind of sitting there hoping that's the way it unfolds in front of you.
I mean, I think what's not being said, like the elephant in the room here, is probably Jacob Wilson. That's the only other guy that really fits into this block. I think if you're Seattle and you have 3 picks in the first round and you have the financial flexibility to really make this a valuable class, I think you probably stay away from the Jacob Wilson, what is the high floor, lower ceiling
Right.
pick at
Yep.
22.
Yep.
Especially because, just because he's a high floor, low ceiling guy does not mean, especially at 22, does not mean you're going to get him under slot. I would be stunned if you got him under slot at 22. You might have to go
Mhm.
over slot like the Reds did with Matt McClain at 17 a couple of years ago. So I think for Seattle, for a team that values exit velos, like it seems that front office has tended to refer to more and more over the last couple of years. I don't think he really fits their archetype, but you have to lump him into that same bucket.
Yeah. So we talked about Enrique Bradfield Jr. just a minute ago. You did. You brought him up. You mentioned him with the White Sox, how he fits there. To me, as we finish this up today, and it's not really the player himself that fascinates me, although he does, because it's a pretty darn good athlete that can do a lot of things on the field. But we're talking about what, an 80 runner, at least a 70 runner, probably an 80 runner, at least a
Yeah.
70 defender in center, maybe
Yeah.
even an 80 defender ultimately. And he can actually steal bases. He's not just a fast guy. He actually gets what he's still like 130 bases at Vandy. Just absolutely great. Caught just 12 or 13 times, I believe it was, and he was perfect. Like he was 100%, like 45. It was 46 for 46 last season. I mean, this is a
And that was a
base
pickoff.
stealer, right? A base
And that was
stealer,
a
a
pickoff.
base runner, and he puts that speed to play at a premium position in the middle of the field and center. The reason he's kind of polarizing, maybe that's not the best word. The reason this is really interesting to me, the profile and where he goes and how teams look at him, this is truly a eye of the beholder kind of situation. Offensively, just as a bat, Enrique Bradfield is not a top 100 pick. Like when you hear and you talk, and I'm reading through my texts and people are like, yeah, this is a guy who, like, at the back end of his swing, he's a power hitter, but everything else suggests he's Willie Wilson. He's going to hit the ball in the gap and run to daylight. Like there's a big stride and there's a lot of room for drifting and gliding and things like that. And he's not a big guy, probably wiry strong, would you say, Enrique Bradfield Jr.?
That's
This is
the
just a
perfect word.
really interesting profile here, Joe. And I just think, I've seen him, in the top 10. I've seen him fall as far as like 17, 18, 19, on some people's boards and some of the public ones that are out there in the mock drafts. But like, for me, this is a difficult guy to figure out. I think this is despite the fact that he's a 3-year college player, this is a difficult guy for me to, toss an eval on. Like, no matter how much information I get, no matter how much data is there, I look at the stats, he did hit 14 home runs, over the past couple of years. So there's at least gap power. Well, yeah. And that is in the SEC. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that projects. I'm just really not. And we're not talking about a guy who went out and hit 430 in the SEC. So he's not a hit tool, get on base a ton, steal a bunch of bases guy necessarily at this point. Lots of questions, but it's difficult to watch him. Even just watch him ground out to second base. It's difficult to watch him and not go, I think I might be able to do something with this guy.
Listen, Ronald Acuna Jr. is on pace for 70 stolen bases. Baseball is changing. 70. Yeah. When's the last time we saw that? 15, 20 years? I mean,
that's a good question.
Been a long time. Yeah. Been a long time. So I look at that and I say, if teams are really embracing the bigger bases and trying to develop these new base running models, I think you kind of have to take a look at Bradfield and just go, the guy stays inside the zone. He doesn't chase, makes a lot of contact. I think he was a little bit unlucky with BABIP this year, and maybe that was, ground balls and weak fly balls. But in a season, in an era where stolen bases are at an all-time high, at least in the most recent history, and at a time when it seems as though so many teams have foregone athleticism in the outfield in exchange for just thump, he's a bit of a throwback, right? Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people want to say that this is going to be Kenny Lofton, and if he's Kenny Lofton, kudos. But even if this is peak Gerard Dyson for 3 or 4 years was an all-star level center fielder, really good player. I think for me, he's the 13th best player in the class. I think you're going to expunge more value out of him than you actually probably think just based on his scouting report. And even if this guy hits like if we were doing a Seattle lean, imagine if JP Crawford was the exact same player that he is, maybe even a little bit better defender, except he was stealing 50 bases a year. Like
It's a different guy.
it's
a totally
an
different guy.
entirely different
Yeah.
it's an entirely different player, and it's up the middle of the field. If I'm if I'm Miami, I think it's a perfect fit. I think it's a great pick.
Is he potentially Jacoby Ellsbury? That's the last guy to steal 70 bases in a major league season, by the way. Jacoby Ellsbury in 2009 stole 70. 2 years before that in the National League, it was Jose Reyes stealing 78. So yeah, it's been a while. The last time someone stole 60, well, D. Strange Gordon did it in 2017, so it hasn't been quite that long. But 70, once you get to 70, you have to go back all the way to 2009. So it brought me to the name Jacoby Ellsbury, and I'm thinking, I remember Ellsbury in college, saw him a lot. Like, are there some similarities? There's some. I think Bradfield has maybe wiry strong on his side there. Like, there may be more upside there when, like, please create some leverage. Ellsbury, though, did start to hit for power. He got a couple of years into his career, had a couple of big years at the plate, hitting the ball out of the ballpark. Is this kind of sort of the idea we're talking about here? Out in center field, playing elite defense, stealing 70 bags a year, and maybe having some years where he hits 15, 20, 25 home runs?
I think that's the profile. I like the D. Strange Gordon thing. Enrique Bradfield Jr. has bat speed. He has an arm bar that's holding him back from actually, showing it in games, but he's shown big exit velos. Like, I think he's a guy that can be, and I wrote this in my report, I think he's a guy that could be 8 to 12 home runs routinely every year. 40 to 50 to 60 home runs per year if you give him 600 plate appearances. The Jacoby Ellsbury thing is great, and Jacoby Ellsbury was a lean, wiry, lanky kid who, it took until he was 25 to start hitting for power, and I think that's what you could see here.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're the same player, but when Corbin Carroll, who's actually from my neck of the woods, from our neck of the woods up here, Joe, the book on him was, this guy's going to drive baseballs, but this is a 40 doubles, 12 to 16 homers, tons of contacts, steal 50, 60 bases. Like, that's the kind of player this guy is. Not a 30 homer guy. But let me tell you something right now, Joe, and you know this well. But I'm just going to, Corbin Carroll's in his rookie season. He's played 73 games as up to this very moment. He has 299 plate appearances. Corbin Carroll has 16 home runs. Now, granted, he's playing his games at Chase. Okay. I understand the ball travels fairly well there. Okay. I completely get it. But this is a guy who's, 5'10" and 175 pounds. Like, sometimes it ain't about size, is it? Like, you generate bat speed, you know how to make contact and create leverage, get that backspin going. Like, you're going to hit the ball hard and far. And if you're already telling me, Joe, that Bradfield does hit the ball hard and has that kind of bat speed, this sounds like this could be a kid that's one quick fix away from that swing, from being exactly that, from being basically more Corbin Carroll than anything else.
And he's got, I start with this in every report. He's got the approach. It's like an 11% chase rate, and for a guy that leads off every game, there's not a lot of thumpers behind him this year at Vanderbilt. He took his pitches. He worked, patient at bats. He got on base. Yeah, he didn't make solid contact night in and night out, but he never lost his approach. And I think the power will come as he continues to get reps.
Really interesting. By the way, Corbin Carroll has 8 home runs at home and 8 home runs on the road. So it's not just about his home ballpark. And he's not a big dude. But yeah, interesting. Enrique Bradfield Jr. Gonna be really interesting to see where he goes. Joe, we're almost 2 weeks out. Like again, as I hit the red button today, 16 days from the draft. It has gone by fast, and we're gonna have to, let's see, how many more shows do we have? We're gonna have 2 more shows, and then we'll have something after the draft, of course, to talk about and kind of recap. It could be a long episode. This might be a buckle up episode of the podcast, but we'll talk again next week. By the way, next week, I'm going to ask Joe about trading competitive balance picks. I keep getting the question. Joe, you and I have talked about it. We've talked about it on our own shows. We've talked about it on other people's shows. We've talked about it in text. We've talked about it in Slack. But we haven't talked about it a whole lot, at least on this show. And I keep getting asked about it. Why does it not happen more? So let's do that as part of next week's show. Joe, we'll talk in a week. Safe travels home. Go baseball.
Go baseball.
All right, this has been the FSS Plus podcast. We'll talk next week.
So just chill till the next episode.